Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another Live at Parentune. Today's session is going to be about booster vaccination for school entry children and everything related to that a parent needs to know. So, childhood is a time of fun, freedom, and mischief. And while every parent wants their precious ones to enjoy their childhood, they also know the value of discipline and structure in the lives of their children. And that's why we encourage our children to follow good habits and healthy discipline when it comes to their food, their sleep schedule, as well as their playtime routine. But a very important aspect is also about immunity discipline, a discipline that all parents have to ensure for their babies and their children so that they're protected from vaccine preventable diseases. This immunity discipline is important for our children as they start going to school, especially. So, because that's when the risk of exposure to various infections occurs, like diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and polio. Children today have plenty of challenges already, and as parents, we want them to be ready to face the world safely. On that note, let me introduce you to our expert for today's live, Dr. Raghuram Malaya.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, doctor.
Good afternoon.
So, Dr. Raghuram is working as the director of neonatology and also the director founder at the Amara Human Milk Bank at Fortis La Femme in Delhi. Dr. Raghuram also has 25 years of experience in the field of neonatology and has performed numerous resuscitations, intubations, ventilation procedures on newborn infants. Welcome, doctor, once again.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here on the show with you, Janna.
Right. So, doctor, my first question to you would be about, building immunity through immunization for school entry children. Could you tell, all the parents that have joined us a little bit about this?
Sure. I think immunization is the best way to protect your child's future. Everybody wants to make sure that their child is okay for the future. Whatever we do, whatever medical care we give, it is always to ensure that the baby's or the child's future is protected properly. And the only and the best way to do that is to get your child immunized properly. There are a lot of debates about vaccinations, whether they actually cause problems. A lot of parents come and ask us, if I give too many vaccinations, is it a problem? And the simple answer to that is no. Vaccinations always helps in protecting your children. By effectively vaccinating children, you're not only protecting your own children, but you're protecting other children in the community as well. And I think that's a very important responsibility that we all have. And it is vitally important that all parents make sure that they complete the immunizations. There should be no misconception about immunizations. They do not weaken your child's immunity. And like I said, it's one of the things which people come and ask us, if I give five vaccines, will there be a problem to my child? The answer to that, from a very, very medical perspective and from a common man's term, it does not cause problem. Immunity vaccination does not affect your immunity at any point. In fact, it helps your own body build antibodies which help you protect against infections in the future. So I think it's very important to make sure that your child gets the vaccination. And as you very correctly pointed out, as time goes by, everybody does tend to get the initial vaccinations, but people over a period of time tend to miss vaccinations as time goes by. Everybody becomes quite blasé about it. Oh, my child is older now, I don't need to protect them. And very
Right.
often, like you correctly said, the preschool immunizations do get missed.
Mhm.
Most people complete the vaccinations up to 2 years because that's the time when the child is at home. Everybody is concentrating on them, and as things go by, everybody gets involved in their own world, and they do tend to miss a lot of these vaccinations.
Right, doctor. I think you completely spoke my mind right now. So as to share my experience as a mom as well, when my twin boys were younger, for the first couple of years, we were very particular about their vaccinations. We had the chart going, the updates, and we made sure to get them done at the exact time. We had a schedule that we were following, and they were protected from all serious diseases like diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio. Everything we was taken care of. But beyond that, now, as our children are growing older, like you mentioned, what are the other booster vaccinations that are important for children later on
So
after the toddler stage?
yeah, so Jana, like you correctly said, once you finish the 2 year vaccination, obviously it's important to make sure that they take the flu vaccines every year. I think that's very important to protect you against the flu. But I think the ones which most people tend to miss is mainly the 4.5 5 year vaccine, which we call as the preschool entry vaccine or the school entry vaccine. So at that time, the most important vaccine is the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus, as well as the injectable polio vaccine. Also, the MMR vaccine is something that needs to be done at the same time. MMR is very important to protect you against measles, mumps, and rubella, and that also needs to be completed at the same time. There have been certain changes in the schedule of the vaccinations. So the children who vaccinated about 4 5 years ago also need to get the chickenpox vaccine at around the same time. The ones who are being born off late, the children sort of 18 months ago, the schedule has changed. But generally, it's the DPT, the injectable polio, and the MMR, which are the important ones before they go joining school.
Right. So, doctor, thank you for, listing out all those vaccines that are important for school entry children, especially. Um, Doctor, I, recently also read about news articles about polio, being reported even in developed countries. And, that was very concerning as a parent. So, can you help us to understand a little bit about the polio infection and how it can be prevented in the case of timely vaccinations?
So, if I can just start with the basic about what polio is all about. Polio is basically a viral infection. And as you know, there is no treatment for polio. For any viral infection, there's no effective treatment. The only way in which you can combat any form of viral infection is by prevention. And that's why vaccination is extremely important, especially in terms of polio. Polio is mainly a virus which is transmitted through what we call as the fecal-oral route, which means it is basically excreted in your stools. And if people don't wash their hands properly, or you drink water which is contaminated, or eat food which is
Okay.
contaminated, that's how this virus spreads.
Right.
So, say, for example, if we talk about India, India has been polio free, has been declared polio free for the last sort of 9 years, 8 to 9 years. I think 2014, India was declared as polio free. It is not eradicated, but it is polio free. We've not had any cases. I think the last reported case in India was in 2011.
Okay.
Most of our cases, which we've seen in India, is mainly transmitted through contaminated water. That is to be the main case. Because of the oral polio drive, the pulse polio drive that was started, we have managed to control it very effectively. Uh,
Right.
i- in the developed countries, most developed countries have had no polio for the last 20, 30 years. So
I
they're almost at the stage where polio has been eradicated. Uh,
Okay.
the the question that you asked me about developed countries and resurgence, I don't think it's been a resurgence as such. There have been a few cases which have come out. Most of them have been from people who have traveled from abroad and come in.
I see.
There is a slightly more complicated version of polio, which is known as vaccine-induced polio. So some of the people who got the oral polio vaccine used to circulate the same vaccine which was given for immunization, and that's how they got those a few polio cases. But I don't think there's a concern about it as a major re-emergence pattern. This was mainly in those very isolated cases they saw. So, to put things into perspective, there are some countries surrounding India as well, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, where polio is still prevalent. So,
Right.
we obviously have to be very, very careful with the polio, and we cannot just say that we've had polio-free period, so we are out of danger from polio. And that's why vaccination is very, very important. Although we have been declared as a polio-free country for the last 8 to 9 years.
Right. So when it comes to the risk of, getting polio, who is at more risk? Is it, a particular age group, a particular demographic group? How does it spread?
So mostly, Jana, the polio transmits mainly in children. They say up to 5 to 6 years of age. But again, there is no hard and fast rule. Even we have seen the cases from the developed countries where actually in young adults. But mostly, as a general rule, if you look at what we call as epidemiology or the way in which polio affects people, it's mainly children less than 5 to 6 years of age. They are the ones at the higher risk.
Right.
Mostly those who have not been vaccinated.
Okay.
Vaccination is very effective in preventing polio. And once you start getting the vaccinations done, then you become low risk or almost very, very small chance of getting polio from them. So that's the reason why the 5 year vaccine, the preschool booster, what we call, is very, very important for people to take and not to forget, because you're still at risk of getting infection at that point in time. So most people, like you were earlier pointing on, think that the vaccines are very important when the child is small. But
Right.
polio is one such thing that you can get it even up to 5 to 6 years of age. So that particular booster is extremely important, because the ones you had early on in life, the effect has waned out by the time you reach 4.5, 5 years. And
Right.
most have shown that as well.
Right. So you've just, mentioned why, immunization against polio is so important. Um, but, how do parents, what are the steps that parents exactly have to take? Because we know that there's, a pulse polio drive also, and then there's, injectable polio as well. So could you, elaborate a little bit about that?
So, what happened? So, I think what you're trying to lead up to the question is, what is the difference between the pulse polio, the oral polio drops,
Yeah, I mean,
and
do parents need to opt for both, and a little bit about why and all that?
yeah. So, the pulse polio has sort of taken a bit of a backseat right now, because India has sort of not eradicated but decreased. We've been polio free for a number of years. So initially, I think I just need to go back to explain a little bit about the difference between the polio drops and the injectable polio. The
Yes.
polio drops were very effective means of controlling the disease, because that was a good vaccine in terms of removing the disease from the system, from the
Oh,
community. Once you remove it, like what India has reached, now we have to get to the next step, which is to protect individual people. And for that, the injectable polio is better.
okay. Got it. So that is the basic difference between injectable, polio and oral polio drops. So doctor, at this point of time, currently children below 5, what are they expected to take? What is the exact schedule that they should follow? Uh, I'm not able to hear you at the moment, doctor. Just trying to fix this. Doctor, would you be able to rejoin this chat? I think that might solve the problem. So, for all those who are with us, we are speaking about booster vaccinations for school entry level children in India. There are there have been updates to the vaccine schedule for children. So, our advice and doctor our experts' advice would be to make sure you're updated with the revised schedule, and that all children, even post their toddler stage, are getting timely vaccinations to prevent a lot of diseases. Doctor spoke about the importance of timely polio vaccinations, DTP vaccinations, and MMR vaccinations as well, which are required. Doctor, I think is back with us. Doctor, can you hear me?
Hi, Jana. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yes, I can hear you now, doctor. So,
Sorry for
like
some
we were,
we lost. Yeah,
right. So, doctor, we were discussing polio in particular, and you
yeah.
mentioned about the difference between oral polio drops and how earlier they, the importance of them and injectable polio. So, could you just once again go over the exact current revised schedule with respect to polio vaccination that children under 5 are required to follow?
Yeah. So at birth, Jana, everybody should get the oral polio drops, and then after that, they need to get sort of three initial polio after the birth, one at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, and 14 weeks. Then they get
Yes.
another polio at 18 weeks. Sorry, at 18 months, and then the
Right.
last one at 5 years. So all in all, they
Okay.
get around five polio plus the one at birth.
So,
That's the
all of
normal.
these are, doctor, just to clarify, all of these are injectable polio now?
No, the
That you,
birth one is always the oral polio, and the five
right.
later on will be the injectable polio. this is what
Okay.
we do in the private sector. In the government sector, they follow a slightly different schedule. They do tend to do a mixture of both oral polio as well as injectable polio shots. But in the private, most people have now moved over to the injectable polio. In fact, the good news for most of the patients, for the parents, is that most of the injectable polio is now combined with the DPT vaccine. So they don't need to get separate injections. So it's all
Right.
combined together, and we finish most of the vaccines with one injection,
Common vaccine.
which I think
Right.
is good news for most people. Yes.
Right. Right. Understood, doctor. So, uh, beyond the 5 year stage, is there any other point in time that kids require polio booster vaccinations as well?
No, not in the routine cases. No. So five would be the last one
Okay.
for them. Again, the 5 year one, it will be combined with the DPT vaccine. So previously, we used to give them as separate vaccines, either as the polio drops or the injection. Now, again, it'll
Okay.
all be combined together as one shot.
Okay, understood. Understood. So I think that was very helpful. The exact current revised schedule for polio vaccination that you specified for us. So are there other I think you addressed that as well. But if we could just once again go over what are the other vaccinations that are recommended at school entry age for children apart from polio?
So I think Jana, the most important ones, if for example, some on a regular basis, it would be mainly the DPT, which is the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, and the injectable polio. Mostly they will be given as one injection. They'll also be definitely due for the MMR vaccine, which is the measles, mumps, and rubella.
Right.
Some of the kids who were born, say, more than 2 years ago, they will also need the chickenpox vaccine. In
Right.
the last 1 to 2 years, there has been a slight revision in the schedule, and now we're giving the second dose of chickenpox slightly earlier for the kids who were born in the last 2 years. But if your kid was born more than 2 years ago, they would probably need the chickenpox. But that once they go and see the doctor, they can discuss it when they go for the other vaccines. But generally, as a rule, it would be the DPT, the injectable polio, and the MMR vaccine.
Right. So, doctor, do all children, once entering school, do they need separate vaccinations I mean, separate injections for all these vaccinations?
No, so that's what I said. So now with the newer vaccines,
Yeah.
the MMR will be a different vaccine. That's a separate vaccine. That'll be one different injection. The diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, and the injectable polio, all four will be combined together, and you can have it as one injection. So
Right.
the number of
So, as
courses is
of now, two
yeah,
injections at
yeah,
for school entry level children.
perfect,
Right.
yeah. And obviously,
Understood.
if they've missed any of the vaccines in the past, it's the story of better late than never. So you can always go back and get them vaccinated.
Okay. Doctor, I've lost your audio at the moment. Uh, we'll have Dr. Raghuram joining us back in just a moment. For all those parents who have joined us on this Parentune Live, we are discussing vaccinations, the importance of vaccinations for school entry level children, and the various vaccinations that they're supposed to receive. Doctor, welcome back. Can I, uh, just, yeah, I can hear you now. Great.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, doctor, I think we should start, taking in questions from the parents who have joined us. We have plenty of questions coming in. So we have a question from our first question is from Sumitra Shinoy. Sumitra would like to ask, my son is 5 years and 5 months old. Should I go for the polio vaccination or for the booster dose?
So it depends on no. So the booster, the one you get at the 5 year is a booster. So booster basically means you've done your initial ones. This is something to boost your immunity. So if he's not had any vaccinations, especially the DPT and the polio, between sort of 4.5 to 5 years, that's the range at which we give the preschool entry ones. Then yes, you should go ahead and get that one. If you've already had the DPT and the injectable polio, you don't need to get another booster. That's the last one.
Okay,
I hope that makes it clear.
right. Sumitra, I hope that answers your question. Our next question is from Monica Gupta. Uh, uh, Doctor, you also mentioned that there are no more polio cases in India. So Monica's question says that from what I know, there are no more polio cases in India. So do I still need to vaccinate my child with the polio vaccine? If you could,
Yeah,
explain the logic behind that, doctor.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, Monica, the reason why we don't have polio cases in India is because of the vaccinations. So, like I explained to you, the vaccine can spread through water, contaminated water, and food. And that is the common place where we get the polio virus still circulating. Just because we have no cases doesn't mean the polio virus doesn't exist in the environment. The virus could still be there, but the reason we're not seeing the cases is because the vaccination program has been so very effective. So there's always the risk of it re-emerging, and especially because we have so many countries around us which still carry the bug, and there are cases being reported over there. So I think in any country, till we eradicate the condition, polio free doesn't mean it's the same as eradication. Eradication means it's gone away from the world and it's not existent. Just to put things into perspective, I'm not sure whether you're aware of smallpox. Smallpox used to be a very difficult condition, dangerous condition. So that took about 30 to 40 years for us to eradicate. Only when there is no case being reported in the whole world can you say a condition has been eradicated. And I think that time period is about 5 to 6 years of no cases reported. Since the virus is still circulating, and as Jarna was telling you, there are some sporadic cases even in developed countries coming. I think it's too early to sort of jump that gun and say that you cannot get the vaccinations done now. Maybe in 10, 20 years we may reach that point, but right now I think everybody should get vaccinated. And the most important reason we are not having the cases is because we are getting people vaccinated so very effectively.
Right. I think doctors very, succinctly told us the importance of vaccinations for the polio vaccination, of course, but I think this applies to almost every disease out there. So our next question is also a very interesting one from Kanchan. Kanchan would like to know, are these vaccinations important or mandatory?
Yes, I don't think there's anything known as mandatory in the world, but they're certainly very, very important. If you're talking only about the preschool vaccines, or if you're telling about all the vaccines, again, all the vaccines at the moment are a choice every parent has. But I think by using vaccines, we have been able to control so many diseases so very effectively. Every vaccine that has been introduced has had a significant impact on not only your own child but the whole community as a whole. So I think in the best interest of your own child and the community, you should get it done. But no vaccine is mandatory. There are people who do not take vaccines. But like I said, if there's any issue, any particular reason, it is important to discuss with your doctor as to why you don't want to take the vaccine. I would 100% advise everybody that you should take vaccines. They not only save your child, but they save a lot of other children in the community as well. So it's very important to take these vaccines.
Right. Doctor, our next question comes in from Amandeep. Amandeep would like to know, what is the most vulnerable age for getting polio?
Amandeep, so like I was just mentioning earlier on, mostly it is to do, polio is most commonly seen in children less than 5 to 6 years of age. Occasionally, it has been reported in older subgroups of people as well, but mostly the most vulnerable population is the less than 5 to 6 years of age children.
Right. Doctor, related to that also, if you could just briefly go over like what are the symptoms that are, observable in a child that is affected by polio at that stage.
Okay, so I think Jana, the good thing is that mostly none of us will come across this disease, so you don't need to be worried about watching out for these symptoms.
Right.
And I don't think people should get scared about about polio and stuff and the symptoms. Polio is just like any other viral infection. In most people, when they do get the polio, they get it like any other viral infection with fever, headache, body ache, generalized tiredness. Some of them may have nausea and vomiting. That's the most common scenario of any viral infection, and that is very similar to polio as well. Polio also, you have the same issues. Obviously, if you get the more severe form of polio, then you get a lot of muscle weakness, and occasionally, thankfully so, very rarely they may get a weakness in the limbs, which may be permanent, mostly in your lower limbs, like the legs. And that's why those occasional people whom you might see who had polio in their childhood may have that paralysis or limping process. But
Right.
those are thankfully very rare. I don't think we should discuss that in too much detail because This is something hopefully none of us want to see in our children.
Right, right. Um, So, Doctor, okay, I think Doctor's just rejoining us in a second. For all of those of you who are with us, we're discussing, entry level vaccinations required for school children at the entry level age, school entry level age, that is. Doctor, our next, question comes from Apeksha. Apeksha Parth Patel. She says, "Why does my son need these booster vaccinations before starting school?" So, what is it about this, particular age group that makes booster vaccinations important?
So, Apeksha, actually, they're known as the before starting school because in most countries abroad, people start school around 4.5 to 5 years. In India, we do tend to start, especially in Delhi. I don't know in other parts, we tend to start school at 3. It is not. It's just known as a preschool vaccine, just because of that reason. It's a terminology that people use. But a lot of the vaccines which we use, they are not a one-off vaccine. They do tend to give you immunity for a particular period of time, and after that, your immunity levels in your body come down, and then you may become vulnerable to get this infection if you don't boost it, and that's why these
Right,
are known as boosters. And although all these vaccinations have been given to you earlier on, you need to take these boosters, otherwise your antibody levels come down in your blood, and the immunity from your initial vaccine, those levels come down, so you're more susceptible, or your child is more susceptible to get infections again. So this is based on huge population based studies that people have determined that this is the time when you need to get another dose to boost up your level, so you don't become vulnerable again to the population, sorry, to the disease. And that's the reason why they're given at this particular age. It is nothing to do with just because your child is going to school, they're more susceptible to get these infections. You can get these infections sitting at home as well. But the reason they're known as the preschool one is because the reason I mentioned earlier on, because most children tend to go to school at that time, and that was the time when they were giving these vaccines at 4.5 to 5 years of age.
right. So, Doctor, our next question comes in from Samara. Samara says, "Are there situations where it's not a good idea for my child to get his booster shot?"
There's no permanent situation as such. You may have a temporary situation where if your child has is due for the vaccine and they have a cough, cold, or fever, mostly if they have a very mild cough, we still do go ahead and give the vaccinations. The only time when we may not give a child a vaccination is when they're running a fever. So obviously, at that particular point in time, you can postpone the vaccine by a week or 2 weeks, and once the child is better, you can go and get the vaccination. Otherwise, these vaccinations are extremely safe, and it can be given for anybody in the population, for any child. There is no particular child that we do not give them the vaccination. There's no exceptional situation where we don't give them the vaccines.
Right. So, Doctor, and for all those parents who have joined us today, we are discussing the importance of booster vaccinations for children at the school entry level age at around 5 years. Doctor, if you could, just summarize for all the parents who have joined us today, the importance of these booster vaccinations and beyond the initial vaccinations that a baby and toddler receives. What is the importance of these booster vaccinations for this particular age group?
Sure, no problem. So just like I said, that vaccinations are the best way to sort of protect your child's future. So although there's I think most people are aware that they do need to get the vaccinations even at the age of 4.5 5 years. Most of them do tend to forget it in the hustle bustle of everyday life. And a lot of people also think that the child is grown bigger now, they become stronger, so they don't need vaccinations. So I think putting that into context is very important. That people don't forget the vaccine, and even if you do forget it and you delay it by a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months, it still doesn't matter. You should still go ahead and get the booster doses. These vaccines are
Right.
very important because a lot of these illnesses, the polio, the diphtheria, pertussis, especially tetanus. Tetanus, we didn't talk a lot about tetanus, but
Yeah.
because we give the tetanus vaccine at 4.5 5 years, which is a booster, if your child falls and gets hurt, which they do multiple times during their
At
lifetime,
this age.
they don't
Right.
need to go ahead and keep getting injections every time, and that's a big advantage. You save so many injections by taking this one booster dose at the 4.5 5 year age group. So booster vaccines are there mainly to boost your immunity. So you would have had most of these vaccines early on in life. Your child would have had them early on in life, but you need to get them to boost your immunity levels so you don't become vulnerable to these diseases again. So I think it's very important not to forget these booster vaccines. Very important for you to go and take it. And by chance you've forgotten to take it, you've missed that window when you should supposed to take. Like I always said, the phrase "better late than never" comes in very handy over here. You should go and get it done, even if you miss them. Even if you feel you're running late, please go ahead and get them. They're extremely important to protect your baby for the next 4 to 5 years from most of these illnesses.
Right. Doctor, just to interject for a moment, we've already, discussed the importance of polio, and I think you mentioned tetanus now, but
Mm.
also about diphtheria and pertussis.
Mm.
How can these diseases affect a child, especially at this age, at this particular age?
So all these conditions are very dangerous conditions. Thankfully, none of us come across it. We've been flooded with other conditions such as COVID and flu and everything else now, and that is
Right.
mainly thanks to the effective method in which we gave these vaccines. 30 years ago, there were maybe even 30, 40 years ago, there were a lot of kids who used to get diphtheria, pertussis, and they're pretty dangerous conditions. They cause
Right.
problems with their breathing. Child cannot breathe, they have a very bad cough, they need hospitalization for a very long period of time. Antibiotics just don't work very well with them. Once you get the infection, you just have to bear through it. Off late, because of the COVID lockdown problems, we had a slight resurgence of all these infections because a lot of kids used to miss their vaccinations.
Right.
Somebody was asking me why, if you don't see cases, why should we still take it? It's because of this reason, that once in the community people start getting it again, then it's very
It will
difficult to
spread.
get rid of it again. It starts spreading from one person to the other. So
Right.
off as early as like 6 months to last year, we did
Hmm.
see some of the cases with whooping cough, which is the pertussis, which
Yeah.
is a very very persistent cough. A lot of kids came in because they had missed their vaccines during the COVID period of time. COVID period.
Okay.
So these bugs are still there in the environment. We have managed to control them because of the effective vaccines, and I
Right.
think
So
that gives you an idea about why these vaccines are important, even though you don't hear of these cases. Like
absolutely.
everybody was hearing about COVID and everybody was going about COVID, but if you stop taking these vaccines, these infections will come back to haunt us again.
Absolutely, doctor. And on the subject of the DTP vaccine, what is the recommended vaccination schedule that parents should follow for that?
So that generally follows the same schedule as the IPV, which I was telling you. So you don't give it at birth, though. You don't need one at birth. So that starts at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 14 weeks. Then at 18 months, 5 years, it continues one extra booster at 10 years,
Right.
which you don't need to, at that time, you don't need to take the injectable polio vaccine, but you only need to take the DPT vaccine.
Right. Are there any specific, risks or side effects that parents need to consider when it comes to the DTP vaccine?
So the vaccines actually have been made very very safe. They've been sort of modified so many times in the past. So previously, a lot of people still come and ask us with the DPT vaccine. My child will get fever, they'll get swelling of the leg, they get a bit of redness. All these used to happen with the older vaccines. With the new vaccines which we are now in the current day using, there are a number of advantages. One is the side effects are very very minor. They're almost similar to what happened when people were taking the COVID vaccine. You'd probably get a bit of fever, a little bit of pain or swelling at the site of injection in a very, very small percentage of people. So, relatively, they're extremely safe. And people have gone ahead with these vaccines. Now we're combining a lot of the vaccines so that the child doesn't get too many pokes, which is one of
Right.
the things which made it less acceptable. People did not obviously want to get one poke for each vaccine, for each particular disease vaccine. So now we're combining as many as six injections in one, vaccines in one injection. So
Right.
the number of shots that the child gets has decreased a lot, even in the last 10 to 15 years. So I think there's really no reason for anybody not to get the vaccines. And it is like a poke in time saves nine. So
Mhm.
I think it's important for people to get that one particular injection so that you protect against so many of the other infections.
Right. On that subject, we have a question that's just come in from Anusuya. She would like to know, in the event that my child is exposed to someone with diphtheria or pertussis, what
Hmm.
steps should I take, and how effective is post-exposure exposure vaccination or treatment?
So in these conditions, post-exposure vaccines don't work. But if you've already had the vaccine and you get exposed to that person, there's no problem, because, like I told you, these bugs are all still there in the environment. We may be coming across them on a regular basis. The reason that you or your child is not getting them is because you've been vaccinated. So
Right.
if you're vaccinated and you do get exposed to them, the chance of you getting the infection is very, very minuscule. So you're almost always protected from it. But once you get exposed, if you then go and take the vaccine for these conditions, they're not very effective because it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for your antibodies to build up. And like I told you, a lot of times you need multiple doses of the vaccine. Like, for example, the diphtheria one, we give them in the beginning, almost every month, we give them 3 shots. That's when you start getting your antibody titers up. So post
Right.
exposure is not a very effective method of controlling it. But if you have
Right.
taken your vaccines on time, you don't need to be worried about it at all.
Okay, great. So, Doctor, for all those parents who have joined us at the moment, if you could just recap a quick recap of the importance of vaccines for booster vaccines in particular for school entry level children. And, I know you've mentioned, if you could tell us specifically once again, polio and DTP and MMR, a little bit about the importance of each of these.
Yeah. So again, just to recap, vaccinations are very important. They protect your child's future. It's very important to take them on time. And by chance, even if you've missed taking them on time, it is important to go back and take them. Even if you're late, it is better than not having it at all. So even if you're late by a month, 2 months, 3 months, you should still go and get your vaccines done. At the preschool or between 4.5 to 5 years of age, to be more specific, your child needs to take the DPT, which is the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, and the injectable polio vaccine, the polio, which is for the polio virus, and also take the MMR vaccine. MMR stands for measles, mumps, and rubella, and these are
Right.
extremely important vaccines to take because they protect your child. They also protect your child for a prolonged period of time, not only at the time when you take it. So it's very important not to miss these vaccines. And like I said, even if you miss them, it's important to go back and see your doctor. Do not ignore these vaccines and say, oh, the time has passed. I've not taken the vaccine, so I might as well leave it, which happens in a lot of cases. I see a lot of parents who come back to me and say, oh, we didn't take the vaccines. So how does it matter now? The time is gone by. There's no such thing. Even if you missed the exact time, you please go back and take these vaccines. They're very, very important for you to protect you against very sort of potentially dangerous illnesses. So it is
Right.
important to take vaccines.
Right. I think that was very educating. That was a good education for all us parents as well, and a timely reminder of the importance of vaccinations. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today. I think like I said, your answers have helped all of us to clarify all our doubts regarding vaccinations.
It was a pleasure to be of help. No problem at all.
Thank you once again. Have a good day.
Thank, thank you. Thank you, Jana. Bye.